Hey, it's Anthony Whitaker here, and welcome to today's episode of the Grow My Salon Business podcast. And whether this is your first time or perhaps you're a regular listener, then thank you very much for joining us today. Now, in case you don't already know, video versions of our podcast are also available on our YouTube channel. So if you want to put faces to the names, then head on over to Grow My Salon Business on YouTube, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. So with that said, on with today's episode. Now, early this year, there was a march on Parliament by hairdressers who were protesting to bring awareness to the tax situation in the UK and how it unfairly impacts on the salon industry. Now, I know that it got extensive coverage on social media and news outlets in other countries as well. And as a result, I've had multiple salon owners from around the world reach out to me asking what it was all about. So my guest today is Toby Dicker. And Toby is a UK-based salon owner and co-founder of the Salon Employers Association, which is an organization set up to represent salon owners of employee-based salon businesses. And Toby, along with a small group of others representing the industry, are at the forefront of lobbying the UK government for changes to the tax system when it comes to the salon industry. So in today's podcast, we're going to discuss a simple overview of what the existing problem is, what the possible solutions could be, and the negative impact that it's currently having on the salon industry as we know it, and lots more. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Toby Dicker.
Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to it.
No, me too. Now, we have had you on the podcast before. We didn't talk about what we're going to cover today. What we're going to cover today is a completely different topic. And it's largely because of a lot of work you've been doing behind the scenes, because UK hairdressing in general obviously gets a lot of global coverage, but last month, it wasn't just in the UK, but, via social media channels, we got a lot of global coverage. And it was really instigated, or, it was about covering the hairdressers' march on Parliament. And as a result of that, it was good social media fodder. It certainly had hairdressers in other countries reaching out to people like me to sort of say, oh my gosh, I wonder how that could affect us in our country. So I just want to start off by first of all saying thank you to you personally. And, I know it's a small group of people that work with you because it's a bit of a selfless task. I know it's an unpaid task that you're doing. And, I know that you really do this with the industry at heart. You do it because you genuinely care about this industry and you want us to be, taken seriously as an industry. And ultimately, really what you want is fairness when it comes to running business. So a lot of our listeners, I think I said to you a minute ago, we've now got listeners in over 100 different countries. Obviously, a big chunk of them are in the UK, but about 50% of them are in the US and Australia and Canada and English-speaking countries. But there's a lot of people out there that are not really familiar with VAT and what our tax system is all about. So I thought I'd start off by, first of all, just asking you to give us a very simple overview of what the VAT tax system is in the UK and, how it compares to a GST, because it's very similar, or a sales tax that other countries might be more familiar with. So do you just want to give us a brief intro on that, and then we can sort of dive into how that impacts on us as an industry?
Yeah, I mean, VAT is, like you say, a sales tax. It's value added tax. So when the government decide that you've added a certain amount of value, they want you to pay that tax. And that tax is 20% on top of your prices or included in your prices. And you don't pay it in the UK until you hit a certain threshold. And that threshold is 90,000. So up until 90,000, you don't pay anything. And as soon as you go above 90,000, you pay the whole 20%. So you would have to have forfeited or collected 15,000 on behalf of the government.
Okay, so talk to us about how the VAT system has a specific impact on salon owners that doesn't necessarily affect other businesses, other industries in the same sort of way.
Okay, well, it's a good point actually, because all businesses in the UK have a 90,000 threshold, and all businesses in the UK pay the 20%. The difference is realistically with hairdressing is you add all your value through labour. So you claim a very small amount of it back. And what that means is that if you stay below the threshold, you're at a distinct advantage over somebody that goes above the threshold. And that's the basic elements. All taxes cumulatively or in different businesses affect them in different ways. And VAT hits any service-based, labour-based business harder than any other.
Right. So why does it affect? So, for example, why does it have a bigger impact on a hairdressing salon than, say, a hardware store or a clothing store?
Okay, because 60% of your costs are labour, and you don't claim VAT back on that, you actually claim it just on the goods you have. So the goods might be 10%, the colour or whatever you're using. You can then claim back about 10% of the VAT. So you end up collecting a whole 18 pence or out of the 20. If you're a hardware store, you've bought in those goods, and actually your costs are completely the opposite. There's probably 10% labor costs and 60% the hardware goods that you buy in, and therefore you claim back 60% of the VAT, and you end up with 8 pence you're collecting on behalf of the government. So you're collecting more than double the tax of other business models on the high street.
Right. Okay. Now, we're living a time where all over the world there's a big change in the employment model, in that there's a real rise in people being self employed. And
Mhm.
there are different things that drive it in different countries. One thing they've all got in common is that it's Gen Z that are driving it, that they want a different work life balance, a different way of working. Another thing that's driving it is these things, because
Mhm.
if you go back 20 years, we didn't have mobile phones, etc. And now with a smartphone, you can do all your marketing online, you can book appointments online, you can do your banking online. So we've all got those things in common, no matter which country you're talking about. But
Mm.
one of the things that's dramatically driving this movement towards more self employed in the UK, which is different to what's driving it in the US and Australia, for example, or Canada, is this VAT issue. So, talk to us about, what it looks like in the UK, because it's not like we have a lot of, say, salon suites here. We have a lot of
Mm.
salons that look like regular salons with 10 or
Yeah.
20 people in it,
Mhm.
but the client doesn't necessarily realize that those 10 or 20 people are actually all self-employed working for themselves. So talk to us about that, and how that's impacting on things.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just VAT. I mean, the VAT is a huge part of it, and that's why we campaigned on it because it would level the playing field to a certain extent. Um, it's actually employers' national insurance as well. That's another thing. So 15% on top of someone's salary for national insurance. So those things combined. I'll give you an example. Two salons next to each other with five stylists in each. And one is turning over 400,000, the other's turning over 400,000. So they look the same. And this is the point. One of those is a single business turning over 400,000. They collect £67,000 in VAT. So a load of VAT. This one collects no VAT. And by the time you put all of those accumulative taxes through, one of those businesses paying 123% more tax or
So
more than double, which means it's almost unviable to run the employment model going forward.
Right. So what you're saying is, although those two salons are both generating 400,000, one of them, the stylists in there are self-employed, and they are generating under the VAT threshold of $90,000. Whereas
E-
collectively, in the other salon where they're all employed, it's generating well over the $90,000 up to the 400,000, as you've said. So that's where the uneven playing field is. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that doesn't happen in any other area because sales tax comes in at much lower levels.
Mm.
So there isn't the incentive to avoid. I think one of the, yeah, I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell. I don't have anything against self-employment, but I do have something against the tax system that means that employees or employers can't give employees what they deserve because they end up being the most taxed business on the whole high street.
Mm.
That includes all other businesses on the high street. So it isn't just that our two models are a problem, it's the fact that we're already paying 3 times more tax than anyone else on the high street as well.
Okay. Now, where do you come up with that number, 3 times more tax?
Well, you could go to bhc.org.uk and you could download the report that the CBI Economics wrote, and you can see those numbers. So 3 times are based on a £1.2 million turnover business with exactly the same rent, exactly the same rates and everything else. But one business has those 60% labor cost, 10% cost of goods sold. One has the opposite. So 60% the products they're buying in and the 10%, 12% labor costs. And the maths comes out that one pays 300,000 in tax and one pays 100,000.
Right. Got it.
That's been done by CBI Economics, who are one of the most respected economic report writing
Mm.
organizations in the world.
And it's because we're such a labor intensive industry. Yeah.
Yeah, we're a labor intensive industry. The labor taxes we contribute are 5 times higher than that other retail because there's
Okay.
5 times as many of us for each pound that comes in the door, and we don't claim any of the VAT back versus their 60% that they claim back, or we
Right.
claim back 10%. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So, talk about the impact that that has on, for example, recruitment or apprentices. What sort of impact's that having on the industry in the UK?
Look, the simple thing is that the employment model is on a precipice to an extent. You have to charge 50% more to be viable, to pay the same salaries. And that's what we've done as a business, but there's many that can't when they're surrounded by businesses that don't do that. And what that means is that because there's less and less margin, there's less and less affordability, and the cost of apprenticeships and so on has gone up in the UK massively.
Mm.
I mean, it's a big subject, but it's gone up. The report states that employment effectively will be over by the end of this Parliament, 2030, and that apprenticeships may well be over in the next 2 years. I've
Right,
got 5 apprentices right now, and I'm putting them on hold, and it's happening everywhere.
right. Okay,
So apprentices were at 16,000 a year in 2015, and we forecast them to be at zero by 2027,
right.
which I think
Unless something is done.
extraordinarily sad
Yeah.
because it's simply unaffordable.
Mm.
And self-employed individuals can't afford to take those apprentices on either. There isn't a solution.
Right. Okay. And you've got multiple salons. I'm not sure how many you've got these days, but
Right.
uh, you've got five. So does it impact on expansion plans for yourself or other people who you know would love to open a second or third or fourth or sixth or seventh salon? And what sort of impacts it having in that area?
My suggestion is that nobody will be growing if they're doing the standard model. And in fact, that's borne out across the industry. Our decision personally has been to double down, uh, aggressively grow and promote what we do, promote the human connection we create, promote the amazing team atmosphere we have, and be able to justify charging that 50% more. That's our
Mm.
approach. But as a whole across the industry, if you're surrounded literally by everyone that's paying much less, then that motivation is incredibly hard to keep
Mm.
and grow. And I can't see any large salon business growing unless they run a self-employment model of sorts. My other challenge around that is that there are a lot of legislation that's in place, and it's so grey that no one really knows what they should be doing.
Mm.
Now, if I could legitimately put people self-employed and make it easy for them and pay them more, I'd do it. But I think there are some real challenges coming along the way. And I think you talked about phones and social media. I think it's been constantly pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed that it's better to be self-employed. And there are a lot of challenges that come with that.
Mm.
Um, and to be honest, all employers that I know are completely flexible on time and hours and all the rest of it now. This is a this is a financial decision for people who believe they're going to get more. And what it actually does is it suppresses prices. And it's a spiral where everyone's competing with each other. And I think that's quite sad as well, because our industry deserves more respect than that.
Okay. Now, I know you, along with a couple of other people, a few other people, have been very heavily involved in trying to lobby government for change. You've not just
Hmm.
been, holding placards out the front of, Parliament. You've actually
Yeah.
sat down at the table with people. What one thing that often comes up is, well, why should the hairdressing industry be treated any differently? Now, you've explained why they should be treated differently, but if I'm a restaurateur, well, there's actually a really good example in during COVID. The hospitality sector, restaurants were treated differently.
Yeah, they were.
So how do you, do you get that said to you when you're talking to the powers that be, when you're talking to government departments about why there should be a case for treating the hairdressing industry differently? What sort of, impact, or what sort of feedback do you get from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it, because they don't have the time to fully understand what's going on. I think the thing that's most unique about our industry is that you can have two different business models next door to each other, like you've already said. They look identical. The consumer has no idea of the difference, and yet one is treated completely differently from a tax perspective. That could not happen in a restaurant. It could not happen in a shoe shop. It could not happen in a hardware store, and it couldn't happen in a jeweler's. And
Mm,
yet it can in our industry, and that means we end up sort of fighting against each other, which I think's really sad. I think if the government looked at tax overall and said, actually, this industry is more taxed, and they've proven it to us, they've reduced VAT in other sectors before. They've done it in farming, they've done it in uh, building of in certain building industries for listed buildings.
mm,
They've done it elsewhere, and there are things that are exempt, like medical procedures. So there's an awful lot of Botox going on for medical reasons, not for cosmetic reasons, because
oh yeah,
one they charge VAT and one's not.
right.
So yeah, it's extraordinarily difficult, and unless you get the time to really explain it, you can't get that across. But the key is there's no other business on the high street that pays more tax, first and foremost, and secondly, that can have two different business models side by side. And if we leveled that playing field, we could bring back, the excitement, the growth, the brilliance of British hairdressing, and that's what I'd love to do. I'd love to bring that together, but at the moment, there's too many. Everything's binary. You hate self-employed. You're this, you're that, and it's everything's binary. It needs to be a collective response that gets a fair deal for hairdressing. And if we don't do that, I believe all the things we say in that report are going to come true.
Right. Okay. Um, I mean, we're based in the UK, just across
Yep.
the water in Ireland. They have a very different system again, don't they? For
Yeah.
example, in Ireland, I believe it's 13.5% on
Yeah.
services and 23% on product. Is that the sort of thing you'd like the government to do here?
The Irish government, when lobbied around 15 years ago now, recognised that there are certain labour-intensive industries, and one of those was hospitality, restaurants, and the other was hairdressing. And they all came together to lobby government to understand that. And the Irish took that on board. Now, in COVID, that was dropped to 9% actually on services. And it there's a lot of talk around the new government in Ireland bringing 9% back in again, because they recognise exactly that we're paying so many labour taxes already that there should be an offset. That's not going to change in Ireland, and it's great that they're considering bringing it down. It is the model that should be. They also have a lower threshold. They have a 30,000 threshold. In the US, most states are zero threshold. In Australia, I'm not sure what it is, but the GST is 10%. So it's much less of
Hmm.
an issue.
Yeah, I think their
And
threshold's 65 or $70,000, so
so
about
about
35,000
£30,000.
pounds.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
35,000 euros, £35,000. I personally believe that would sort the problems out. Every single self-employed person would disagree with me. So again, we have to come to a consensus on that. And at the end of the day, this is more a political problem than an economic problem. When the people that are looking at this from an economic point of view, they go, yeah, it makes complete sense what you're saying. When they try and put that into a law, you then get the challenges.
Mm.
So most people in government who's ever listened get the problem. They just don't know what to do about it.
Right. So you just said something like, I think that's fair, but then you said, but most self-employed people would disagree with that. Explain to the listeners what you mean by that and why they might disagree. Because you were talking
Well,
about lowering the threshold, weren't you?
yeah,
Yeah.
most of the industry now in the UK, some 65 to 70% are
Mm.
in the self-employed model, which is 5, 6 times what the UK average is. And there's lots of reasons for doing that, as I said before. But if you lower the threshold, the time when you start to have to charge VAT or collect VAT on behalf of the government comes in earlier, and therefore they'd say that's penalising them. And again, I can sympathise with that. But if that means that there's no future training
Mm.
and the imbalance stays at 123%, i.e., 2.25 times more tax for an employed model, then I don't think there's a future for training in the industry and for growth, really. I just think we're just going to be an island of people that have learned online
Mm.
and end up in salons. And
Yeah.
that's my prediction for the next 20 years. There'll be a few salons that can stay and offer that opportunity, but very few. And I'm not trying to be down and bleak about
Mm.
it. I just want to try and do something about it now.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's that word fairness. Um, like if the government were to reduce the threshold, meaning the point at which people start paying VAT from currently 90,000 down to, I'll pluck a figure out the air and say 30,000,
hmm
that would mean that a lot more self-employed people would have to be charging VAT as well.
Agreed.
Um,
And again, I'm not here to argue the benefits or otherwise. All
yeah,
I'm saying is right now, there needs to be some leveling.
yeah.
And if the VAT rate was brought down to 10%, that would level things out.
Mm.
If the VAT threshold was brought down, that would level things out.
So
And
which
we
of
could
those
then
two would you
respectfully,
prefer? The threshold
uh,
being lowered or the VAT amount being lowered, or both of them?
look, it has to deliver from a government perspective, right? So I'm not going to get into the detail of that. What I will say is hairdressing services in general should be paying less. So I think if service-based businesses who are paying all their labour taxes paid 0%, that would be perfect.
Mm.
The government are never going to take that. So 10% first. And then once you've got that, lowering the threshold actually becomes more palatable because the individuals aren't paying as much,
Yeah,
if that makes sense. But
yeah, yeah.
I think 10% would actually solve the problems in itself. The government would never be able to sell that to the electorate. And
But
that's the
yeah,
problem. It's not that I don't agree that it should be zero,
mm.
it's that they're never going to be able to sell that. And they're much more likely to come after our industry or come after all industries in terms of tax by lowering the threshold. I don't know.
Yeah,
And I don't have any inkling of that. A lot of the decisions are made by government departments and you know, we just want to make our industry have a loud enough voice so that we're respected and we're taken seriously
mm.
and where it's recognized what we do and deliver and how hard amazing people in this industry work and that they pay a fair amount of tax, and I mean less
Yes,
basically, because they're adding way more to the economy per pound turned over than any other business.
mm.
So that's where I am with it. Look, it's a very personal thing about the lowering of the threshold.
Mm.
It brings us into line with the rest of the developed nations. It's increased, in my opinion, for political reasons, but it's very much my opinion,
Mm.
not SEA, not BHC, and all the other organisations
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
involved
yeah,
with.
yeah, yeah.
I just personally think
Mm.
that's
Well, it's
a way of
it's
levelling.
yeah. You don't have to be Einstein to sort of figure out that the government are actually shooting themselves in the foot in a lot of
Yes,
ways,
absolutely.
because by the industry becoming more and more self-employed, they're collecting no VAT from them. The
Exactly.
government are collecting nothing. Whereas if they were to lower the threshold down to say 30,000 or whatever, then it would be an even playing field for everybody. And if you were someone who didn't have a dog in the fight, I don't have a dog in the fight, but I am at least in the industry. If you
Yeah,
were someone who wasn't even in the industry looking at this, you'd go, well, of course that should happen. That would just be fair that everybody pays
yeah.
VAT, not that you have these two different business models running side by side. But obviously the upside of all of this, if that was to happen, and I would say it's an upside, is that it would be good. A lot of people then that are self-employed would then want to go back to become employees in a business, and that would be better for the industry in terms of training, apprenticeship opportunities, that sort of stuff. So in terms of the long-term benefits, would you agree with me on that, that that would be better for the industry at large?
Again, I have a particular opinion and I do have skin in the game. I
Yeah.
agree with you, and
Mm,
I think that would be better. I think what's not thought about is that those individuals who are below the threshold now might want to grow a business. And now the incentive is so strong to avoid doing so
mhm,
that they're always going to be in that place. Now, of course, there's a place for that, and there should be a choice, but it should be a choice based upon what's right and fair, and that's where I am. I know lots of people say, well, I have to do X, Y, and Z to run my business. You get the tax advantages. I don't mind if I personally pay more tax.
mm,
I don't mind if all the taxes stay the same. I don't mind if, as a director, I end up paying the same tax as anyone else, just as long as it's equal,
yeah.
because you can't compete fairly when it's not equal. Now, again, as I say, different people have different things. I'm not even asking for parity.
Mm,
I'm asking for a closing of the gap
yeah, yeah.
so that the advantages I have, you know, allow me to keep employing, allow me to train another 5 apprentices next year,
Mm.
allow me to do those things
Which
and
is
invest
which
in
is
the
good for
industry.
everybody.
Well, I think so,
Yeah,
but again,
yeah.
as I said, this
It's
can be a very divisive
mm.
topic.
It sounds like
And
you've been bashed up a bit, Toby. I don't know, but it sounds like you've had some fairly fierce defenders of the other side of the coin.
yeah, look, there of course there's going to be, and at the end of the day, I have to work for the people that are crying down the phone to me, who
Mm,
are saying, I'm going to end it all, literally.
mm,
I'm going to lose my home.
mm,
Um, these people, this is where the industry's at, and that's the
mm.
saddest part. People online, if they have a good profile, can make as much noise as they want. And people have personally attacked me about how I've been with them, and that's fine. I'm not going to take it on personally. I'm going to keep fighting for my team, keep
Yeah,
growing my team. I've just celebrated two people who've been with me for 25 years. So
fantastic.
I'm not, it
Mm,
can't be that bad, one would hope.
yeah.
And I want them, actually. This is the bit that always gets missed. I want my team, who I regard as peers and equals, to have the same tax opportunities as anyone else.
Mm,
Why should they forfeit 35, 40% of what they bring in for a company just because of a tax system?
mm,
Because every tax in every equally applied tax, when applied to hairdressing, hits us harder than anyone else.
yeah. You.
That's where I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be beaten up, and but I can handle it. I've got thick skin. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. I've also got thousands of people thanking
Mm,
our group for what we do,
yeah.
but it
Yeah.
is exhausting, and it is done gratis, and um, there's a huge emotional toll, and there are times where I wish I hadn't done it.
Mm, I'm sure there are. Yeah, I'm sure there are. Um, what is meant by the term disguised employment? Because it's something we talk about a lot here, but a lot of other
Okay.
countries would go, what do they mean by that?
Okay, you've already basically summed it up. There are two salons next door to one another. For all intents and purposes, the public can't tell the difference. Um, they make people self-employed to avoid the taxes, and yet still treat them as employees. Tell them what to wear, tell them when to come in, tell them what hours to open, tell them what products to use, and so on. So there are some good operators who rent chairs, who do services and charge things in the right way. And there are some people that have done this because they have no other choice. And I don't even, there are many who are forced into do this. It's not bad. It's just if all of the salons around you are doing this, you feel you have no choice. And I've been in conversations with them and gone, do you know you might be doing this illegally? And they say, it might well be, but
Mm.
I lose my home or I go into this model. And the government have been so soft on this, or the HMRC have been so soft on this, and they haven't given us correct guidelines. The guidelines are incredibly loose that no one knows. And
Yeah.
that's the point. And again, if the playing field was equal, it wouldn't happen. It simply wouldn't happen. People
Mm.
would have a choice to do one or the other, and it would feel completely okay. But instead, they talk about enforcing against bad people. I don't see anyone as bad in this industry.
Mm.
It's just, I don't have a choice. I have to do this to survive.
Yeah.
And once most of the industry is doing that, the rest have to follow. And what suffers is the excitement that comes in the industry, the collaborative working together, the the awards that we all do together, things that have made our industry amazing. The 80s and 90s and early noughties were incredible for
Mm.
excitement and growth. And look at what the British hairdressing can do in the world.
Mm.
And we've lost all of that
Mm.
because it's all about money.
Mm.
It's all about the finance. It's all about arguing between people. And yet investing in that future and bringing back the excitement would happen if everybody could just get on with doing hairdressing,
Mm.
not fight and scrabble around for whatever happens next.
Yeah. Just for our US audience, well, for all of our audience, you just went HMRC. We all know HMRC stands for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, or His Majesty's Revenue and Customs now, meaning the tax man. Okay.
Yes.
So if you're, for the American audience, the IRS, or, whatever your government departments are that collect tax, that's what Toby meant by that. The other thing you touched on, you just sort of glossed over it really quickly, but I think it's a really important part of this, is you said the disincentive for growth. And just explain what you mean by that. So I'm a hairdresser, I'm self-employed, or maybe I'm in a small salon. I mean, let's face it, a good hairdresser, a good stylist is going to be able to generate £90,000 a year behind the
Yeah.
chair working full time.
Yeah.
But if you're in, say, the north of England or in a small town or village or whatever, then you're probably not going to generate that sort of money. And you might have a salon with a couple of people and still manage to sit underneath that £90,000 threshold. So what I wanted you to sort of expand on is what's happening for a hairdresser, whether they're employing one or two people and sitting under that threshold, or whether they're a self-employed person and sitting under that threshold. What is it that's actually happening that they get to 85,000 a year, and do they go, I'm not going to work anymore because I've got to pay a lot more tax? Is that literally what's happening, that they just start working a 4-day week or a 3-day week so that they sit underneath that 90,000 pounds, and so therefore it is a disincentive to grow a business? I mean, sorry, I've asked the question, I've sort of been answering it as well, but I'd just
No.
like to get your insight on that.
Again, I can't speak for everybody, but that's the way it feels. It's the way it feels that it's a massive disincentive. If you turn over £89,999, your business keeps 89,199. If you turn over £90,000 and one pence, you've got to pay immediately £15,000 in VAT, and you might claim back 1,500. So call it 13,500.
Mm,
That's a big chunk of change,
mm,
and you are not going to be better off until you hit around the 120,000 mark.
yeah,
So if you're at 85, you've got to grow your business by 50% to even be better off. And that is really sums it up.
yeah, to be in the
I
same
think
place, basically.
I think employing one person, maybe you can stay below the threshold, but let's think the minimum wage is 30 grand. So
Yeah.
45 is not very much money to turn
Mm,
over. But some people stop working, perhaps. Some people don't put it through the books, perhaps. Some people take a job in a supermarket and do it on the side, perhaps.
Mm.
I'm not saying that's what happens all the time, but
Yeah.
it's a massive disincentive. And I think people say, "Oh, I turned over X, Y, and Z when I was in a salon," and then you're complaining about this, and then you ask what their turnover is, and they go, they don't answer
Mm.
because that's the incentive. And there have been big self-employed salons or collaborative spaces where the owner have said, "No one in my place pays VAT."
Mm.
And
Okay.
there are stories of people running two different businesses where one is a hairdressing business, one's a beauty business, and one washes the hair and one cuts the hair.
Mm.
Those things are stories, they're things that are out there. And again, I'm not wanting to divide the industry, I'm wanting
Mm.
to try and say, if we had a leveling of the playing field, these things would go away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
These
that is not
chances people are
those.
taking would go away. And
Yeah.
how that leveling of the playing field comes about is
Mm.
a reduction in VAT, a zeroing of VAT, a reduction in threshold, an understanding from government that is, it's not for me to make policy,
Mm.
but what I would say is if you get a leveling of the playing field, the incentive, the growth starts immediately because you don't have any barriers. Young people who are in that Gen Z who have chosen to go into self-employment, who actually are feeling entrepreneurial, can just grow. And this is what we've been saying. 2.25 times more tax stops all of that dead. It stops growth, it stops entrepreneurialism, and it stops those things.
Mm.
And as I said, I'm not having a go at anyone, but if you make the playing field more level, industry thrives.
Yes, and it's more professional for all of us. And that brings me on to something I wanted to ask you about. And it's a little bit UK centric, but exactly the same thing will exist in every other country because often what happens, and I made a little bit of a list of names of organizations: British Hairdressing Consortium,
Hmm.
um, Salon Employers Association, the one you co-founded, Hair Barber Council, I've heard you mention them,
Yeah,
Men's Hairdressing Federation,
yeah.
Fellowship for British Hairdressing, NHBF, British Beauty Council, Save Our Salons. There's all these sort of organizations, and I'm wanting to ask you, do we shoot ourselves in the foot by doing that as an industry because there's too many bodies that are representing us, lobbying on our behalf, but we lack a cohesive voice? Have I mistaken that, or is that a correct assumption to make?
It's an absolutely correct assumption to make. And what Barry, who runs the fellowship, did was bring us together under the BHC. So the idea is if we don't agree on a way forward, which we're all trying to do, and present the information in the right way, people will stop listening.
Right. So
Um,
the
I
BHC,
agree with that. But the
the
BHC
BHC
is
is
the
the
British Hair
British
Consortium.
Hairdressing Consortium. Yeah.
Correct.
And they've all been pulled in underneath that, have they? So there's
Every
one.
single organisation has been invited,
Right.
um, and there are a number who have come together to represent, and that's how we got as
Good.
much
Good.
industry as possible. There are a couple of organisations that we're building trust with and trying to grow that opportunity because everyone has a slightly different interest in this.
Mm.
Um, but we'll have to wait and see. I constantly put out there that we need one voice,
Yeah.
and the things we can do, it's like the threshold, right? Most people, certainly in the self-employed sector, don't want that said. So we don't go forward with that being the solution. We go forward with a reduction in 10%. It gets suggested that a threshold would be good, but collectively we have to agree. And when we sit in that room, we discuss those things, what we can agree on, and then we take that forward. But yes, without all organizations presenting the same information and doing that collectively, it's never going to help.
Mm. Okay. So yourself, one or two other people, however many, sit down with the government representatives who have the power to make these changes. Where are we currently with that?
Hmm. I have been removed personally from some of these groups because I say passionately what it's like. And when I was given some information that wouldn't help us in the slightest, I said, well, what's the point in anyone paying their tax then? And that's a challenge. Where are we? Much further ahead than we were a year ago, 2 years ago.
Okay.
Different government departments approach it in different ways. Um, I think it's a real shame that that some departments don't have a specific voice from salon owners, and that's the challenge. But I don't want to get into saying one organisation's good and bad
Mm-hmm.
and the other isn't. Things have moved forward.
Mm.
Discussions have had. Sometimes you're asked not to say anything. I think the biggest plus of all is that MPs came together for the first time in history to debate the hairdressing industry in Parliament a week or so
I
ago.
saw that on the news. So that in
Amazing.
itself is a huge achievement, isn't it?
Yeah, and I could get emotional about that,
Mm,
but there are salon owners who are delighted about that from a cross section of parties across the industry. They backed
mm,
what we were talking about and a review of tax or a leveling of playing field, but specifically a reduction in VAT. I don't think that'll happen because politically it's too hard. But the
right.
fact that the conversation is happening now is a really positive thing.
Mm,
And it's an example of where coming together is going to improve those things.
yeah, yeah.
There are some things, people know because I've said things in the past that I haven't seen us all come together. I think we have a better opportunity now, and we're trying very hard to talk to those organisations to do that. But yeah, we had a debate in Parliament. It may be taken further. Other conversations are happening, some that I'm party to, and many that I'm not because
Mm,
of my very direct style of communication.
yeah. Well,
I'm being a
sometimes you have to
diplomat.
be to get through, don't you? Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Okay.
you have to sometimes to get it in the news, but
Yeah,
politicians don't necessarily like that approach.
yeah. Okay. Where does licensing and registration for the industry fit into this puzzle? Because in the UK, I mean, everyone in the UK will know that there is no licensing and registration at the moment, whereas
No,
Americans would be aghast at that because everyone
yeah.
has to have a license. So, and there's often talk here about we should be licensed, etc. Is there a direct link to that in terms of being taken more seriously and that sort of thing as an industry body?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. It's something that the Hair and Barber Council, who we work closely with, support and always have done. I think it's more needed now than ever because you've got people trading in all sorts of different ways. I think the biggest thing that's also in the news is um, barbers who are not trained and laundering money. It's a big part of what's going on in the industry at the moment. So
Mm,
barbers are being forced out of business because they can't compete. But realistically, they're competing with people that are laundering money and doing haircuts for a fiver. Um, so I do think that registration and collectively the bodies coming together to create a register would massively improve things because we'd know who works in the industry, we'd know how many people that is, we'd have all of that. The black economy would be much more challenging,
mm,
and I think it would again bring professionalism. In the UK, gas fitters have to have something called the Corgi register.
mm,
Corgi registered gas fitters earn a lot more money because they are accredited and respected, and that is another reason for us to be, yeah, taken more seriously.
mm,
It's the same thing. We're hairdressers who are patted on the head and told, "Oh, thanks very much for cutting our hair." We're brilliant, brilliant people. Hairdressers are the most emotionally intelligent people in the world. They understand more about people than most psychologists.
mm,
They make people feel amazing. Fix, they spot medical challenges for people. They understand, they see people age and grow and develop and go through their divorces, and they understand all of that.
mm.
And yet they're treated with complete disdain. And that's what makes me more angry than anything, to be honest.
Mm. And is
You know,
that particularly at a government level when you're trying to get changes done? Is that what you mean specifically, or not
it's
necessarily?
in
In
no,
general, in
I think it's
society?
in general. I think
Yeah.
societally, people that use hairdressers and understand it absolutely respect that
Mm.
enormously. But I think that also we're not serious business people. We're not this, we're not that. There's been some unbelievable entrepreneurs in this industry.
Mm.
Look at what the guys at Tony and Guy did.
Mm.
Look at what they've created. Look at what Sassoon did. Look at what a lot of the
Yeah.
greats, Trevor Storby did. Look at what those people did. They transcended their industry and they changed the world in many ways. I
Mm.
know that sounds a bit melodramatic, but
Yeah.
it's
No.
not.
Yeah,
They
definitely. Yeah.
really
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
And yet we're still treated with disrespect.
Mm.
There are some brilliant people in this industry.
Yeah.
And each time one of those taxes goes up, you break them a little bit more, or you get them to leave, or you, yeah, make them feel less.
Mm.
Hairdressers might not have the schooling smarts or the academia, but I'll put any MP up against any one of them to understand people, and the hairdresser would beat them hands down.
Mm.
And it's much harder what the hairdresser does every day. That's how I feel. And I think we should have respect. I think we should be understood. I think all of us should pay less percentage of the tax that we bring in. And I think that we should just be taken seriously for once,
Yeah.
because then we can bring back growing high streets, bring in millions of people in footfall every day, bring back creativity and excitement that's been sucked out of society. Yeah, and contribute.
Yeah.
But while all the while we're dragged into you should work in Sainsbury's, sorry, you work in a supermarket for 5 days a week, and then I'll do hair at the weekend.
Yeah.
That's wrong.
Yeah. Definitely.
You should get paid a proper living
Mm.
for being a hairdresser, not get 40% of it taken by tax.
Mm. Do you, obviously you meet and have a lot to do with a lot of salon owners across different parts of the industry.
Mhm.
Um, do you think that there's a lot of salon owners that sort of, I don't want to say they don't care, but they don't get involved in this because they don't really understand it. They don't understand tax and they don't think that they can have any impact on change. So they sort of feel a bit disconnected from what's happening and they just find another way to make it all add up, so to speak.
I think that's a bit of an underestimation of business owners in the industry in terms of a thing. I think people are very, very
Good,
engaged. They
good.
just felt like they were on their own. They
Mm,
thought they were the only one.
right.
And the amount of times I've heard I thought I was a failure. I thought I was the one failing. And
Mm,
yet they go, wow, everyone's in this boat. So
yeah.
bringing people together in that way has been extraordinarily positive because they're not academic.
Mm,
They might feel like that on their own.
yeah,
They
yeah.
might have been told they're not great at school or whatever. But no, I think people are really engaged. I think the fact that we've managed to lobby so many individual MPs and will continue to do so,
Mm,
and they've got the reaction they wanted, and they've got the backing of the organisation that can give them the response they need has been really, really good.
yeah.
I also think there are many salon owners who haven't heard of us or haven't come together who don't understand the impact of what's coming their way. And to be true, it's the 1st of May, first payday since all these tax rises came in. So we haven't been affected yet. And I have great fear for the next 6 months. But what
Mm,
we're going to do is bring more of that campaigning and target those MPs one by one and continue to share that.
yeah. Okay. How can hairdressers get involved? Someone who's listening to this in the UK, how can they get more involved behind this?
Okay. If you're a salon owner, or you work in an employed salon, Salon Employers Association.co.uk, sign up. It's free. We send you messages and you can help support in that way. If you're anything else, have a look at bhc.org. .uk, and that will give you other organisations that you can link into, and just have a voice,
Good.
step
Yeah.
up, be part of it. As I say, there are many people that disagree with a lot of what gets said, and there's a lot of anger out there. But my main goal is to get us respected and heard.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, listen, we need to start wrapping things up here. I'll put those links that you just mentioned. I'll put them in the show notes. I know you're not big on social media yourself. I know your
No.
salon brand is not big on social media, very consciously.
Yeah.
I remember we spoke about that in our last podcast. But is there anywhere else you'd like to send them? Any Instagram channel or
Yeah.
anything like that they should join? Connect?
Yeah, Salon Employers Association, there's about 7,500 followers on that. We communicate through that, and it's been an effective use. There's some great video content on there. And our YouTube channel as well, Salon Employers Association's got some of the videos on it. I'd love to send you a link to the campaign video. It's a great piece of work. So yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
good. Okay. All right. Well, listen, I'll put those links in the show notes for today's podcast for wherever you're listening to this. And if you've enjoyed this podcast with Toby and you want to share it with other people, then please do so. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and review on the Apple Podcast app. So to wrap up, Toby Dicker, thank you for being on this week's episode of the Grow My Salon Business podcast.
Thanks very much for having me. Thanks for listening and allowing me to share this in not just a sound bite. I think often sound bites are the things that divide us, and perhaps coming together and having a conversation is what's going to bring the industry together.
Definitely. Well, thank you for giving up your time, and thanks for everything you do.